and welcome to the Business of Sports show. This is episode number 1, so thank you for joining in. This whole podcast is about looking at sports and, more importantly, looking at the business of sport as well, and about interviewing different characters, different individuals from the world of sport. So there's no better way to start it than someone who is probably, I'm right in saying, is a little bit controversial in terms of Welsh rugby and the effect you had on Welsh rugby. So I'd like to introduce my first guest. It is none other than David Moffatt. Hi, David.
Matthew, thank you very much. I'm very honoured to be on your very first show, and I wish you every success with it. I'm sure it will be very successful. But you've actually picked a very interesting topic because I'm fond of saying that rugby is too much of a business to be a sport and too much of a sport to be a business. And so many people fail in rugby administration because they just don't understand that in this modern day. But I think I do, and there's not many of us.
Well, we'll cover off your kind of track record in a minute, but for those people who don't necessarily know you, so all those people outside of the world of rugby union, tell us a little bit about your backgrounds.
Sure. I was born in Yorkshire. Notice I don't say England because there's two different things. At age 3, my father took us to East Africa, so I was brought up in Kenya and went to school in Nairobi. Then we went to immigrated to Brisbane, where I finished my schooling. Spent most of my life in Sydney and didn't go to university because I couldn't work out why I'd want to do that. So did all sorts of different things and ended up owning my own waste business, which was called Pacific Waste Management, which I sold to an American company. And then after that, got into sports administration, chief executive of New South Wales Rugby, SANZAAR, New Zealand Rugby, then to the National Rugby League in Australia, Sport England, and then Welsh Rugby. And then I've been sort of doing my own stuff back here in New Zealand as a consultant and thinking of other things that I might like to do.
We'll come on to those in a minute, but so it's quite a big history in terms of sports. I mean, taking on New South Wales, Sport England, you said, and then obviously, the biggest job in world rugby, the Welsh Rugby Union. So how did you end up becoming, the chief exec of the Welsh Rugby Union?
Yeah, I think New Zealand Rugby would most likely challenge your view that that Wales is the biggest rugby union, but they're on a par, aren't they, in terms of their rugby pedigree and the effect
Very
they've had on in the world of rugby. And I'm very proud of the fact that I was the chief executive of both of those rugby unions. I'm not sure that anybody else is ever going to achieve that, the chief executive role, because there have been coaches like Hansen and Henry that have coached both. But, somebody like me, I don't think I would have dreamt of it when I got into sport. But, yeah, it happened. And most of the positions that I had, perhaps all of them, I was headhunted for. I had, in terms of the Sport England, I'd been headhunted and I got that job. When I got to Sport England, I decided and I said that I would like to make Sport England immune from a change of government.
Quite a challenge.
Quite a challenge and a lofty challenge, and it was never going to happen, and it still won't happen. And I wasn't the sort of person. I mean, anybody who goes in there as a chief executive got to accept that their masters are the politicians, and they will want to actually direct what you do. And fortunately, Wales came knocking on the door, and that's how I ended up in Wales.
Now, when you kind of took over, I mean, it's quite interesting what you said a minute ago in terms of the business of sport and the sport of business. Now, I've done my research. Now, it kind of looks like when you actually took over the WRU, it said that they had debts of £55 million after building the Millennium Stadium, what's now known as the Principality Stadium, as well as kind of poor financial management. I mean, the game had only just really turned professional, and I think, from my view, on a very outside point of view, it was probably committee on committee on committee. The old style, the old boys club.
Yeah.
It's quite a situation to take over when you're going into a business with that amount of debt, and especially when it's a sport as well. So the commodity is literally what's on the pitch. So tell us a little bit about kind of how you set about kind of rectifying that and taking on that challenge, really.
Yeah, I mean, the debt was bigger than that. It was 72 million, and we got it down to
Okay.
about 48 million. Renegotiated the debt with the bank and also with BT. We're owed quite a bit of money from the purchase of the land that was acquired to actually build the stadium, because they changed the stadium from one aspect to another, and they needed that land. And they never finished the stadium in reality, because at one end of it, which backs onto Cardiff Arms Park, the old Cardiff Arms Park, was never finished because they could never get agreement from the Cardiff Athletic Club to actually acquire that land. So there's one end which doesn't look right. But essentially, Welsh Rugby was trading whilst insolvent when I got there. They couldn't pay their debts, and when they became due and payable, and it was only because of the goodwill of the bank and BT that they were able to continue trading. So I set about, cutting costs and increasing revenues. I mean, business is simple. Your income's got to exceed your expenditure. It's pretty simple, and so I set about achieving that. And within a couple of years, I think we had actually achieved a major turnaround from what it was, and set it on course for a future which was sustainable. But it was difficult, and there were other decisions that I had to take that forced me to take decisions that I wouldn't normally have taken, but because we didn't have any money, I wasn't able to follow the right course in reality.
Yeah, and I think that probably then ends up kind of in my comments earlier about being one of the controversial figures, because with that kind of level of debt and actually trading as an insolvent business, realistically, you have to make those decisions. You have to make those tough decisions that people don't like, and especially when you look at Welsh rugby and its kind of tribal nature. I think one of your biggest actions that you'll probably be forever known as, good or bad, is introducing regional rugby into Wales and kind of cutting the teams down and almost making sworn enemies take to the pitch together. So talk to me about that kind of that kind of decision to almost revolutionise the top level of the game in Wales. The kind of business kind of reasons behind it, and what actually got implemented versus what was your original plan as well. Because whilst I know, it'd be great for everybody else to kind of hear it from the architect.
I think one of the reasons why I was given the job was because I was at New Zealand Rugby when they went down to 5 professional teams from the 16 regions that there were in New Zealand, and I've been through that. I've been through it at the NRL when there was a reduction of teams made there. But there was no way that Wales could sustain 12 professional teams, and they thought they could. There was only 12 professional teams in the whole of the Southern Hemisphere. And let's face it, Wales hadn't won a Grand Slam for 27 years. So I set about pretty much giving them an ultimatum. You guys work out who you're going to, how we're going to do this, because, there was a great pushback against, the clubs being made super clubs. And they did that. was tortuous, difficult. And in the end, I didn't get what I wanted. I wanted 3 teams along the M4 corridor and 1 in North Wales. And the North Wales thing came off the table very quickly because I had two of the clubs, Llanelli and Cardiff, threatening to sue their own union over what was a participation agreement that they had signed previously, which was going to get torn up. And so they stood firm. I had no money to fight it. You know, if it had been later when, you know, Welsh Rugby had a lot of money, I would have, because I think in the end they would have lost the court of public opinion.
Yeah, and I think that would have, that would have changed everything.
Well, it would have changed a lot. Because what we ended up with is 2 standalone clubs and 2 regions, sort of. So that was somewhat difficult, but we got there in the end, and I think I got about a 99.7% approval rating at the AGM where it was pushed through.
That's quite staggering when you kind of think that people even now still complain in some quarters about regional rugby and things like that. But to think you got.
Sorry to butt in, but I mean, I just wanted to make this point while I remembered I'm getting senile in my old age. But the issue surrounding Welsh rugby that really continues to amaze me is that they're always at war with each other.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter. And it's happening now. Today, as we sit here and speak, there is all sorts of shenanigans going on in Welsh rugby, you know.
Oh, yes.
They've just, the CEO's gone. They put another guy in that wouldn't know the first thing about being a chief executive. And, you know, it's a nightmare. And I don't know if it'll ever change. But here's the thing. You know, you talk about the Welsh valleys and that sort of thing, and the Welsh think that they've got, you know, a monopoly on parochialism. Now, parochialism, and you know, it's the you know, no, it's our valley and we should have our own professional team, like, you know, we got from Breathe, for example, who went broke of their own volition and actually couldn't sustain a partnership in professional rugby. So, but this parochialism can be positive and nor it can be negative. And in relation to Wales, it's always a negative. I mean, okay, New Zealand's provinces are as parochial. You get a game against Auckland and Christchurch, for example, you know, and you'll see parochialism there, but they use it positively because what they say is, rightio, we are going to go to war on the field with, you know, with whoever it is, and we are as parochial as the next guy, but we will do whatever is required to do to actually make sure that the All Blacks continue to win.
Yeah.
And therein lies a huge difference. There is a positive use of parochialism versus the negative use of it in Wales. I don't think you can ever, I'm not sure that you'll ever overcome that because of the history of Wales. You know, it is a bit different. You know, that valley, you know, there are 7 valleys, I think, in Wales. And I mean, you know, you can understand the way that Wales is organised geographically, but their attitude to North Wales, I mean, if I was North Wales, I'd secede from Wales because, you know, because what...
Let's not get too controversial now, David.
I'm happy to be controversial because South Wales, you know, that's it. You know, I don't know where it stops in their minds, but it's certainly there's a line drawn, the Maginot line there drawn somewhere. So, you know, those are all real difficulties that still exist in Welsh rugby.
Yeah, and I think, as you said, it'll always exist, and you know, it's always that us and them kind of attitude, and you know, I do like the kind of the New Zealand mindset in terms of, you know, the All Blacks being successful, because let's face it, you know, the All Blacks being successful puts bums on seats. You know, wherever they go,
Absolutely.
You know, it is a big marketing beast. It's a big business, you know, and it's a big draw. You know, same as, you know, Wales filling the Millennium Stadium or Principality Stadium, you know, for challenging for Grand Slams. Nobody wants to challenge for a wooden spoon.
Yeah, but so you
So
talk about Grand Slams. Within 18 months, Wales had won their first Grand Slam in 27 years after
yeah,
regional rugby. So what does that tell
yeah.
you? It
Well, I
tells
mean,
me all I need to know.
well, exactly. I mean, you've got more of the guys playing together regularly, so they understand each other. Rather than picking one person from one club and five from another. So I mean, I think the cards on the table are regional rugby has worked mostly. Still got that kind of tribalism to a certain extent, but let's kind of go back to looking at the WRU as a whole and looking at under your leadership going from making losses of over 4 million plus to then by the time you actually exited making a profit. That's a big swing, and actually making profits of around about 4 million a year,
Yeah.
probably even more than that. So you know what would be your proudest achievement, kind of looking at the business, to kind of say, well, that was the biggest thing, or those are the biggest achievements that you look back fondly on.
Yeah, it was the turnaround financially and also the turnaround on the field. And also that we ran a fairly lean ship. What I don't understand is all the unions right around the world who have got so many people, employed as staff, and I could never understand why that needed to be the case. I still can't. But anyway,
Well, you say staff as well, but again, you culled a lot from the board as well,
yeah,
and I think that's probably one of the, that's certainly something I've seen sometimes in organisations, is that sometimes there can be more people on the board than there are actually doing the jobs, and that is just staggering sometimes, because what did you cut down?
and quite often, those board members are people that I call cup of tea and biscuit board members, because they turn up once a month, have a cup of tea and a biscuit, don't
Yeah,
in actual fact do anything other than agree with what the chairman or chief executive want, and then they go home again and they pick up £5,000-10,000 or whatever it is, for
yeah,
their board seat. But it's a little bit wrong to say that I actually reduced the number on the board. That had happened before I got there. It was restructured, but I was the first chief executive. Prior to me, they had a old secretary style arrangement, and I could never have worked in Welsh Rugby. But they still had committees. I mean, one of the very first things I did in cost cutting was to reduce the benefits that the committee had. They didn't like it very much. For a start, we used to pay for the wives to go away on Six Nations weekends, and we stopped that. We said, if you want the wives to go, terrific, but you're going to have to pay for them. And I know that after I left, all those things were reinstated, and perhaps that's fine. When I look back at what's happened since I left, one, there's not been any understanding that they needed to review what we put in place, because everything changes all the time. Nobody's ever done anything about it. And then they had a chief executive who, with the current guy who's going to be the interim chief executive, who's running the finances, who came up with the brilliant idea of paying off about £16 million because they were awash with cash to the bank. And then just recently, they've had to go and borrow money from the bank because they're out of money. I mean, that's the sort of bizarre, silly decisions that people make, who in actual fact are not proper chief executives. You need to be able to, if you're, I'm not quite sure what your audience is, but to all those people out there, if you're going to be a good chief executive, you have got to make good decisions all the time. You might make mistakes, right? And you can't be afraid of making mistakes. But if you're going to fail quickly and fix it, and that's a piece of advice I would give anybody in a
it's a
senior
great
role.
piece of advice. Yeah, I mean, you said about committee members and their benefits, and I recently watched another podcast where Dylan Hartley, when he became England captain, um, kind of giving the aftermatch speeches and thanking the players and the staff and all this, but he didn't thank the committee. And one of the committee members came up to him apparently and said, "Look, next time, thank the committee, because we've travelled out to Italy to watch you play." and I think his reaction. Well, I don't want to start introducing swear words at this time,
No.
but his reaction was probably the same as I'd probably have, of going, you've come on an all expenses trip to Italy to watch England play, and you want to be thanked for your expenses. And I think that's probably a good thing, because at the end of the day, if you want to go and support a team or a country or something like that, you do it because you want to, not because you're part of the committee and you want the pat on the back. And I think a lot of people at board level, sometimes, as you said, the tea and biscuit brigade, that's exactly what they do. They like to have it on their LinkedIn, I'm part of this and I'm part of that. But actually, when it comes to it, they go to the meeting. As soon as they cross the threshold of that door, that's it. They've forgotten about it. It's off their shoulders.
Yeah. I haven't been offered too many positions on board since I've left, because I would be too confronting for a lot of boards. Insofar as I would actually, firstly, I'd most likely read the board papers for a start, which should be a novel approach for many board members. and then I would be quite interested in having, an input into policy. I mean, a lot of policy arrives at the boards by way of the chief executive and his staff, right? But as a board member, I want to actually put a little bit of pressure back down towards the chief executive and staff in relation to policies I think they should be working on. I never, ever, in any rugby union I worked in, rugby league, got a board coming to me and saying, we want you to investigate this as a policy, or this as a way forward. Never once. It was always bottom up. And that's a lazy way of being a board member, I believe.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that, because if you're on the board, if you're in an organisation, rather than just relying on one person to come up with everything, if you can contribute and you can come at it from a different angle. We've all got different experiences. We've all got different, we've all come from different backgrounds. So if you can use that experience to contribute, then I think that's a positive experience. Providing it's not, very draconian and kind of, it's more of a discussion and things like that. Then I think, again, it's just about the ways of working with people. But I think that's very surprising. Well, I say it's very surprising. I've been in those exact experiences where the boards have just literally turned up and not necessarily done too much or anything.
Unprepared,
Yeah, just ready for the tea and biscuits, as you said. So you left the WIU. So what have you been up to?
All sorts of different things. For a while I was helping a good friend, Nigel England, run Site Serve Recycling in Wales, and I really enjoyed that. That was the industry I was back. I got a lot of experience in and a lot of interest and passion about. And then we came to New Zealand. Well, and that happened while we were here in New Zealand. Set up my own consultancy, done various things. Recently I do a fair bit of volunteering with Business Mentors New Zealand. So, especially at this period in time, and it's pro bono. So, people approach them to find somebody like me who can help them through these difficult times. So I'm doing a bit of that and various other things. But I've actually sort of set my sights on something a little bit bigger than that at the moment.
Go on, do explain.
Well, I'm really sort of been incensed for some while about the way the rugby is currently being played and the way in which the game is going, and that basically comes down to several important things. There is no longer a competition for possession in rugby. Once a team's got the ball, they go and fall on the ground, and then they recycle it, and then they go off and they go from side to side, and there's no way you can get the ball in a maul. The thing that they call a ruck now is just, it's just ridiculous. And then scrums are being used as a weapon to get penalties. That's the way the South Africa won the recent World Cup.
Yeah.
Then what made me think that I would like to do something about this was the way in which the game is going from a safety point of view. So many people are now having concussions in the game. I mean, it's just almost, rugby union will try and downplay it, but it's worse than they're actually admitting. And it came to a head when Brodie Retallick, who you may or may not know, I mean, he's one of the best rugby players I've ever seen play the game.
The beast.
And in the game, in a game against South Africa, prior to the World Cup, he was taken out on the. Well, he was actually sort of lying on the ground, and he may have been in the wrong position, but by a South African called Snyman. He's a big lump of a player.
Yeah.
And Brodie ended up 3 months on the sideline with a broken shoulder, and he wasn't the same player at the World Cup finals. Nothing happened to Snyman, and it was all in this guise of clearing out. Well, not even in the current law book are you allowed to attack a player who hasn't got possession of the ball, what that is. And it is a disgrace, and they've done nothing about it. And if they don't, they're going to end up with litigation. Now, whether it's now or, as we're seeing with American football, whether it's in 20 years' time when the real, effect of the concussions and what have you. So I sat down with a guy called Topo Rodriguez, who used to be a loose head forward for Australia, Argentinian, possibly one of the best loose head forwards who've ever played the game. And so we decided to have a look at this, and it became clear very quickly there needs to be some fundamental changes, which the World Rugby would never actually do, and there needs to be a number of them. So I set about rewriting the laws, and quickly it became clear that it needed a new game or a new branch of rugby. So formed something called rugby rules, and there are 10 rules, and there are 6 regulations. If anybody's interested, you can go to www.rugbyrules.world, and you can find them all there, and some of the reasons why we've done what we've done. But as I said earlier, there's some really innovative things there, and what we're focusing on is, and you would know all about this, and people, is we want to return to an authentic, safe, simple to play and understand and referee and watch game, which is fast and athletic and all those sorts of things. And so that's the aim. And I think that this, what we've come up with, in actual fact, I think can achieve that.
Excellent. I mean, I've read through it, and as you said at the time, it's a mix of rugby union, rugby league, a bit of American football. It is a slightly different style. I'd almost compare it to almost a 2020 or kind of one day version of cricket almost. That from the full game of rugby to the rugby rules version that you've created. It's 3 20-minute sections, periods. And again, it is all about that athleticism rather than, as you said, flying into rucks and causing havoc and actually causing some serious damage to people. And you say about concussions, how many players have we seen? Lee Halfpenny, for instance, out for concussion for several months. And I think
I don't know how George North is still playing the game given the number of concussions he's had.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's always kind of played on my mind is we've never really seen an old professional, someone who's played professional rugby from day one to the time they finish, and add another 20 or 30 years to actually see the impact of the game. To see the aches and pains, the neck issues, the shoulders, the back issues, all of these things. And I mean, even the podcast I watched yesterday with Dylan Hartley, he says, okay, he's retired now, but he still has a few issues from the concussions that he's had.
And he will have, absolutely, and he's going to, and so we don't want that. And so therefore, I don't see this as the same as 2020 because it's played in 3 periods. That's been done deliberately because the game's going to be fast, and it's still a game for all shapes, body sizes and that sort of thing. But it's to give a break. But then also with a look to television, they'll get 2 10-minute breaks for advertising money coming in, which will help pay for it. Right? And so, and I had one eye on the American market when I was designing this stuff. And I think that they should actually think that would be a really good idea. But I mean, something's got to change. And World Rugby, Bill Moffatt, I mean, I know Bill well, and I quite like Bill, but he is not the guy that is going to take the game forward. In actual fact, I don't think there's anybody there. Even Gus Pichot, I don't know what he was on about. They keep talking about this global season. What the hell does that mean? I've got no idea what it means. Nobody can tell me what it actually means. Do we all play at the same time, or what the hell are they talking about? So, and the other thing too, everybody seems to be focused on that 0.1% of players that play professional rugby.
Yeah.
But what about the other 99.9% of players, that are playing out in their clubs, and they've got all different skills and, fitness levels, and ability to withstand, injuries and all those. What about them? Nobody's thinking about them. They're just thinking about the professional game. And this is going to be, if we can get this going and rolling, it'll be a grassroots up movement. And
Well,
it's not going.
I think that's the only way you're going to get the kind of unions or the power brokers to kind of take notice is, if more and more people choose to play rugby rules rather than, the normal traditional. Well, I say traditional, as you said, it's changed multiple times over the years, and that's when it'll kind of ignite and take off, and I
was talking to a guy. He's got a couple of kids here in New Zealand. A guy that I used to work with. I gave him a job at New Zealand Rugby. It's an interesting story. He came in to see me. He was a lawyer. And he came in to see me to tell me what we should be doing in the professional era, and he walked out with a job.
Fair enough.
Which I didn't have, but I gave him one because I was impressed with him. And I was talking to him this evening, and he said that his wife doesn't want his children to play rugby.
Yeah.
This guy, and they're a big rugby family, his wife's family, and what have you. And they don't want them to play because of the way in which the game is currently played. And that is wrong, and that's something I would like to change.
Yeah.
And I have no faith in World Rugby or national governing bodies. Right. I have no interest in working with the Welsh Rugby Union, for example. They can't even run the game at the moment that they've got to run properly. So what the hell are they going to do with something like this? It's just. I know I'm most likely going to sound all bitter and twisted. I'm not bitter and twisted. If I was bitter and twisted,
you're passionate.
Yeah, I'm passionate, but I'm also not afraid to speak my mind either.
Yeah, no, I think that's a key thing. So just kind of bringing it slightly back to kind of looking at the business side of things. You said you're a mentor in New Zealand. So the kind of final thing I wanted to kind of cover is, what would be your 3 bits of advice that you would give to kind of businesses at kind of all levels, really?
Yeah. Okay. So how people say that they think out of the box and they think out of the square, right?
Yeah.
That's really sad. And I'll tell you why. Because they've got themselves in boxes and squares, right, to start with. And I never have been in a box or a square. And I would say to them, you're only constrained by the limits of your imagination. Let your imagination run wild. Never put yourself in any box or square. Don't let anybody else put you in one. And a perfect example of that is me coming up with something like this, rugby rules.
Yeah.
If I was all stuck in a box, I would be constrained by conventional thinking. Yeah. That's the first bit of advice that I would give them. And the second bit is three words: adapt, improve, and overcome. So you adapt to everything that's going on around you, like the COVID-19 or Wu flu, as I prefer to call it, right? You adapt to it, and then you improve whilst, look, look at Zoom. You know, I saw some figures about Zoom. All right. So they've improved it. I don't use Zoom myself because I don't like the idea that they actually largely owned by the Chinese. But anyway, that putting that to one side, you know, there's a good example. And then overcome, right? So there's all these obstacles that are going to put in your way through either your own individual careers or what the company wants to do. But if you are adapt and you're able to improve, you will overcome.
Yeah.
So it's those three words that I think that are very important. And the last piece of advice I would give anybody who is still with us and hasn't gone to bed yet or turned off is the soft option is always the wrong option.
Yeah.
And if you think about life, whenever you've taken soft options, whether you're a referee or a player or a businessman or even at home, you know, with the kids, soft option, just to keep them quiet, you know.
The shortcuts.
Have another glass of wine, son. No, but you know what I was saying. Yeah. So that is pretty much the three bits of advice that I would give people, because I don't want to get too heavy into, you know.
No. But I think those are great bits of advice, and especially about the soft option. You know, and I think it's too true. People always look for the golden bullet. They look for the thing that's the one deal that will make their business, you know, blow up. It's almost like I'm talking about Lord of the Rings or whatever. You know, the one ring to rule them all.
And so, do you know which part of society takes the soft options more than anybody else?
No, go on.
Politicians.
The quick wins for the quick votes to move forward.
Absolutely. Yeah. They take soft options at every opportunity, and that's why we end up in the mess we're in.
Very, very true. There are no shortcuts to life.
No.
I think that's a very poignant bit to kind of draw a close on. David, it's been fantastic chatting with you and having you on board for the first episode. You know, kind of really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed catching up with you as well. You know, best of luck with the rugby rules, but you know, thank you for giving us an insight into your journey. Controversial though it may be, but interesting. You know, as you said, you know, not taking the soft options.
No,
I think that's
thank you very much,
really key thing.
Matthew, and good luck with the show, because you know you deserve it, and I'm sure it'll just go from strength to strength.
Thanks very much, David.
Okay, mate.
Speak soon.